Hi, Yen here, and in this challenge vlog video thing, I'm gonna try and see if my favorite books are still my favorite. Now, when I was about 18, 19, 20, I kind of decided on my favorite books and I haven't read them since. And I want to see if those still are my favorite books or have I outgrown them. So, yeah, in this vlog, I will be rereading those books and just seeing if I still call them my favorite. So obviously in this video I won't have the Hunger Games. Those were my favorite series as a teenager, and then as a preteen, Narnia was my favorite. And obviously my last year's favorite and my current all-time favorite book is A Place for Us by Fatima Farhin Mirza. So I won't be rereading that one in the vlog because I just recently read this, but I would like to reread this at some point this year. But yeah, this is my current most recent favorite book. What are those favorite books of all time that I decided as a teenager but now I'm questioning? First off is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Obviously, I read this first time when I was 15, 16, and then in English at 18, and then I recently reread this. Is it still a favorite? Let's see. I Am the Messenger by Markus Zusak. I think I read this when I was 19 years old, and I remember being so hooked and impressed by how captivating this book is and how the mystery was planned out and written and so forth. But honestly, before rereading the back cover, I did not remember what this book was actually thoroughly about. I remembered some bits here and there. So let's see. Another favorite from when I was about 18, 19 is A Place to Call Home by Carol Matthews. This is the only Carol Matthews book I've read. And I remember that this is about Aisha and her daughter Sabina and how they run off from an abusive husband. And I have some recollection of the story, but I don't remember much of it. And the most recent favorite of mine is The Poet X by Elisabeth Acevedo. I read this in 2019, actually in Finnish, and I was really impressed how well the story was told in that kind of poetic format. As you can see, it's all in poetry. And I remember that this was very popular at the time of its release. I think it's YA book, so that kind of makes me wonder if I still like it. So was I Am the Messenger. So I posted an on-haul video where I talked about how I've outgrown YA. So let's see if it's the case with these books as well. I would like to start with talking about I Am the Messenger by Markus Zusak. I feel like every time somebody talks about Markus Zusak, they mention that he wrote The Book Thief, which now I've also done. But basically, this was released in 2002, so over 20 years ago now. And it tells the story of the main character, Ed Kennedy, who in the start of the story stops a bank robbery. Then after the bank robbery, he starts receiving, playing cards of the aces. And the aces have different kinds of hints, for example, addresses, names, movie names, and so on. And they always lead to a person that Ed Kennedy needs to help. Now, Ed Kennedy is 19. He has recently lost his father. He is a taxi driver and he feels like he's not really worth anything. He feels like he's not doing much with his life. He has his friend group, Audrey, who he is very in love with, Marv and Richie, with whom he plays cards and hangs out. But he feels like he doesn't really have much going on in his life prior to getting these messages and helping people. He lives in the same small town that he has lived his whole life while his siblings have gone to live in the city. His mother still lives in the same old town, but they don't really have a great relationship between them. I really want to read the first words of the story because I feel like it's a really exciting start that really has you hooked from the start. The gunman is useless. I know it. He knows it. The whole bank knows it. Even my best mate Marvin knows it, and he's more useless than the gunman. And the worst part about the whole thing is that Marv's car is standing outside in a 15-minute parking zone. We are all face down on the floor and the car's only got a few minutes left on it. The reader experiences this kind of sudden urgency right in the beginning of the book. That was a great way of starting the book. By chapter 10, I felt a bit mixed because the story and how it was presented, yeah, it was good, but I don't know if Ed's reflections of life were as intriguing as I thought of them to be, like so deep and interesting. But they are deep at times, but not as impressive as I maybe thought that they would be after I kind of remember what's going on in the story. This is a book written by a man in 2002 with a male main character. So there is a bit of like this kind of male gazy description about female characters, especially Audrey. I feel like Audrey deserved better. I feel like if Ed is truly in love with Audrey, shouldn't we know more about Audrey than just that Ed is in love with her, she has a boyfriend, and apparently she has had a hard life, but we're not really told that what happened. And yeah, there's description of her body, and I don't know, I just feel like she deserved better. The writing is really good, and I underlined many quotes from here. One quote that I really felt deeply was Ed confronting his mother and saying, and then her mother says to him, "Believe it or not, it takes a lot of love to hate you like this." Ooh, that's deep. So he starts all these missions with helping people. I think my favorite one is where he helps Thomas O'Reilly, who is a pastor, but his church has been quite empty lately. And I love that the story isn't about indoctrination and trying to make people convert into Christianity and make them force them into doing something. No, it was more about like having community gathering and gathering people around. And I thought that was a really sweet story. Another one is a story of Milla, who is an elderly woman who somehow sees Ed as her former husband who had passed away. I felt like she was so sweet. And I feel like overall the missions were really interesting, and the people, all of them had like valuable time. Some of the missions were smaller, some of them were bigger, some of them involved abuse cases and that very heavy stuff, but all of them were presented as important and valuable representations of people and different characters. I thought the ending, and I'm really trying not to spoil too much here, but I thought the ending could have been a bit better. It felt a bit lackluster. This kind of philosophical, like everything happened for a reason, all of this was planned. Like, I don't know, it felt a bit like, oh, that's it? This is the reasoning for all of this? Okay. So considering kind of the lackluster ending and, the description of some female characters, especially Audrey, like, yeah, sure, this was written or published in 2002. Times were very different then. So it's not understandable, but it explains it. But then again, some of the writing was really, really great. And some of the storylines were so beautiful. It hurts me to say that I wouldn't say that this is one of my favorite books anymore, because it wasn't as incredible and deep and amazing as it once was at 19, but this is still a really good book, in my opinion, if you kind of forget about the misogyny, I suppose. That sounds awful, but you know what I mean. No longer a favorite, but still a very good book. The second book that I would like to talk about as my younger self's favorite book is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and I'm just gonna start by saying that yes, this is still my favorite, and I'm still gonna say that Pride and Prejudice is one of my favorite books. I recently posted a whole vlog with my partner Joel where we further discuss why Pride and Prejudice is great. But in this video I'll just say quickly, like, even though this reflects as a society at a certain time, it's still very fitting to today's society, expectations for women, marriage and so on. And I love that there aren't like just bad and evil and just good and perfect characters. All of them have some kind of flaws and complexities and like beautiful reflections on humanity and society overall. I love Elizabeth. I feel like she's so well written, and she is not perfect, but she learns and she's human. She's allowed to be human, and it's such an incredible story, and it remains as a favorite. Now, I still must reread The Poet X and A Place to Call Home, so I'll see you in the next clip. Alright, I'm back. I have now finished A Place to Call Home by Carol Matthews and The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. Let's start with A Place to Call Home since I read it first. I didn't remember much what happened in this book. I only read it once, around 18, 19. And I only remembered that the main character, Aisha, escapes an abusive marriage with her child, Sabina, and that she finds a place for peace and safety. And that's kind of all I remembered. So it almost felt like reading a new book. I don't really remember why I've chosen this as a favorite back then. I guess I got attached to Ayesha and didn't really think of anything else, and just wanted the character of Ayesha to do well and be happy. That's the scope of the story. So Ayesha leaves her husband Suresh in the middle of the night with their daughter Sabina. The story is mostly told from Ayesha's perspective, but there are changes in perspective. Sometimes they describe things from Suresh's perspective or other characters. This was a disappointment. I'll try to keep this spoiler free as possible. This was released in 2014, so I was quite worried that it would have some outdated remarks. And it does kind of have like a stereotypical beginning, like an arranged marriage is abusive. And we do have Carol Matthews, who is a white woman, describing the marriage of a Sri Lankan couple. Like, there is nuances there that I probably didn't think of back then, which I'm angry at myself about. I'm not gonna go too deep into that, but is it her place to tell this story? Is it Carol Matthews' place to tell this story? But then again, we do need all people talk about the safety of women and women's rights. It's a difficult thing. This novel tells the story of a Sri Lankan woman, and the story is told by a white author, so there are nuances there that should be considered when reading this. So Ayesha escapes, and then she tries to go to the women's shelter that she had researched online. You know, whenever she could, she was in a very abusive household that didn't allow her to go to a lot of places and so on. But the shelter rejects her. There are too many women there. But the person working there finds a way for her to have a safe place that is not a shelter. And she goes to live in a house that's owned by Hayden, who is a former singer, and there with him lives Joy, who is a retired woman, and Crystal, who is a professional dancer. Ayesha shared that she didn't really have a strict religious upbringing, that at her home they would look at things from Buddhism, Hinduism, Catholicism even, back in Sri Lanka. This takes place in the UK. But when she escapes and has had these horrible years of being abused, she has kind of lost her faith in everything, which is understandable. Ayesha and Crystal become really great friends. Crystal helps Ayesha a lot, and it's a really sweet bond. But there are some moments that kind of irk me, and I find if, for example, Crystal, without Ayesha's consent, removes Ayesha's headscarf that Ayesha is wearing. But Ayesha describes that, in my other life, I may have been offended by someone manhandling me like this, removing the scarf. Now I feel lucky to have someone like Crystal to help me. I just feel like she shouldn't have done that without Ayesha's consent, you know? Ayesha wants to see where Crystal works, and when she sees that Crystal works in a strict club that doesn't really respect her as an employee and so on. There's really interesting discussion about like that kind of work, but I don't think it's really nuanced. Crystal then quits her job with the encouragement of Aisha. There is romance in this book, but I didn't really feel it. Whenever there was something romantic, I was just like, oh, okay, that's nice, I guess. But there is also like, this woman is traumatized. Is it too soon to have a romantic relationship to her? She has a lot to process, but at the same time, she does deserve happiness and joy and love. I don't know. Joy is an interesting side character. Her story is also told and she's not like shunned away. Yeah, she's a nice character. Not much. I don't really have thoughts about her. Hayden, he's really closed off and quiet when Aisha first comes because he has been traumatized as well. But with Aisha's company, he starts to see a different perspective to life. When I started reading the book, I kind of remembered some details that were happening. For example, I don't know if this is a major spoiler, Suresh does find Aisha eventually. So whenever there was something going well, I wasn't really enjoying it as like a heartwarming scene. I was more like dreading, like, okay, things are going well, something bad will happen. Sabina doesn't speak because of the abuse that she witnessed that her mother went through by her father. So that's one of the major plot lines here. And I am rooting for Sabina. I think she's a sweet child character. There are chapters about Suresh, and apparently he's some kind of like, he steals jewelry or expensive stuff and then resells them for lower price or something like. Honestly, I skimmed through them. They were just so uninteresting to me. Near the end, there's a little bit of a time when we don't actually hear from Aisha at all, and we kind of wonder where Aisha and Sabina have gone through the eyes of Hayden and Crystal, which I thought was a nice shift in focus. It has a happy ending. That's it. As you can probably guess, this is no longer a favorite, and yeah, I even struggle to remember why this was a favorite. I guess I was attached to Aisha, as I said before, but the writing isn't really anything special. The characters, most of them are sweet, but they're not really complex or have much to them, and that's fine. But like, if the story is something as it is in this, I feel like there needs to be some complexity in the characters as well. As I said, I didn't really care for the romance. I thought it was a bit rushed, but you know, I didn't mind it, but I didn't really care for it, if that makes sense. Yeah, this took me a long time to read, and this is that kind of writing that usually doesn't take me too long, but because of the story, I was kind of bored at times. It was kind of a struggle to get through this, which I feel bad about, but like, I did finish it. So yeah, this is no longer a favorite, and that's disappointing, but what can you do? Next up is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, and this tells the story of Xiomara Batista, who is a teenager who reflects on her life every day in a poetic form in her diary. She has a father who is present but he's kind of absent, a mother who is really strict and very religious, and then a twin brother who has her side, but they are quite different. I think it's YA. I think this is meant for like teenager to YA, and this is the most recent of these books that I've read. I read this in 2019 and I actually read it in Finnish, so this was my first time reading it in English. And the main focus of this book is how Xiomara feels trapped and feels difficult in her position with a strict mother, with being sexually harassed by men and boys for her body, and having this creative outlet of writing poetry, but she can't fully pursue it the way she would like to. She is a teenager, so she has feelings for boys, but her mother is strict. The location of this book is Harlem, and the family and the main character are Dominican. So in poetic format, Xiomara talks about being a teenager, her thoughts on religion, her thoughts on gender, sexuality. And I think the reflections are done really well, considering that this is meant for a younger audience. I feel like for a younger audience this is very palatable and very easy to understand, but not in a way that ridiculous the reader, if that makes sense. I think the bond between the twins, Xiomara and Javier, is really beautifully presented. I don't want to spoil too much, but one of the main plot conflicts is the fact that a new poetry club starts at Xiomara's school, but it is at the same time as Xiomara's confirmation studies that, you know, she is kind of being forced to take by her mother. So she doesn't want to be in the confirmation classes, but she has to go. And, you know, her thoughts on that and religion, as I mentioned, it's so well written. Oh my goodness. She also starts having feelings for this guy, Aman, who feels the same way, but she knows that she isn't allowed to date boys and that she's doing something wrong. But at the same time, is it wrong? Is it human? And I just think this story is really well written. And even if I'm not a target audience for this book anymore at 26, I still think it's a really good story that even as an adult I can find really, really compelling. I did write down some scenes, but I feel like I don't want to spoil too much. And I mostly just wrote down quotes that I really liked, so I thought I would read them now. So here on page 259, my little words feel important for just a moment. Dancing is a good way to tell someone you love them, from 355. Will you burn me? Will you burn me too? You would burn me, wouldn't you, if you could? That was so heartbreaking and so heavy and so vulnerable and so amazingly written. I think my only downside of this book is everything is resolved in a way that's not really told to the reader. The reader kind of has to put 1 + 1 together and kind of think of how they resolved the issues that were presented. I would have liked to read it and see it happen here, but I understand why the author chose not to do that. I read this in one day, and not because I was rushing through the poems, but because I just could not put it down and I wanted to see where the story goes. So I think it's safe to say that this is still a favorite. Alright, so out of these 4 books, 2 are still favorites, Pride and Prejudice and The Poet's X. When I thought of my favorite books, these were the first 4 that came into mind from like my teenage years. Obviously, I do have lots of other favorite books that I could get into, but that's that for this video. Just a quick personal note, there have been less videos and there will be less videos for springtime because I got a job as an English teacher, so I would be focusing on that more. Sorry about that, I suppose, but I kind of need to focus on that. And yeah, let me know if you've ever had a favorite book that then a few years later you're like, why was this my favorite ever? I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.